one of the big things that really drove the fire, obviously, was the wind. And there's a lot of strangeness associated with that also. And Bruce, you want to just ask us questions also about the changing winds that were experienced during the fire and the intensity of it. So, Bruce, if you want to take over and just show Tim some of the strange things that you.
So I'm going to show you the wind anomalies here. I'll
Okay.
start by showing what the wind pattern looked like. Um, each day, there's a high resolution shot that happens twice a day over all across the entire world. And so twice a day it comes over Hawaii and we get these high resolution shots. This is August 5th. You see normal weather patterns coming at us, AM and PM. And on the 6th, you see normal weather patterns, AM, 6 PM. But on the 7th, you start seeing the lines, the clouds lining up in lines. And by the afternoon of the 7th, the day before the fire, you see it in pronounced cloud lines coming at me. And I live on the North Shore. I was watching these strange straight line clouds going across the sky one after another and kind of made a mental note like, well, I haven't seen that before. It was coming on the North Shore of Maui where I live. And what's also strange is you see it gets to Hawaii, the Hawaiian island chains, and it stops. It doesn't go past us.
Right.
These winds are coming from this direction here in a straight line. And all these pictures, you don't see that pattern. I'm going to back up one day. You'll see the same thing. You know, in the morning, the pattern was not coming at us on the other thing.
Right. I see that.
Okay.
Line, it runs right through the whole chain.
And here's the morning of the 8th. And again, there's different daylight and evening time pictures. So, but you still see the lines coming at us in the morning of the 8th. And this is when the actual fire was happening.
Go back one. So these foggy patterns that are behind it, is that the lee? Is that the
That's
mountain?
the leeward side. So that often happens where clouds will billow around, but you don't see these clouds didn't continue beyond the Hawaiian Islands. They stopped right there.
Right. But my thing is that it's kind of interesting to me. You can see where it goes through the isthmus from Kahului to Kihei, and you got that little clear zone, but then it connects right between Lanai and Lahaina.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's indicating that that's a lee zone. So if that's a lee, that means it's being blocked by the mountain that's in front of it, and it's blocked. They call it katabatic and adiabatic winds. You know, they roll around like a rock in the middle of a river, right, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
If the winds are claiming the winds were so strong and everything, but look, Lahaina is in the lee. It's actually got a little break right there where it's not being blown out. You can see where it's blown out in the isthmus between Kahului and Kihei, where the winds funnel through there always.
Correct.
And then
Right
it blew that out. There's no clouds right there. But if this was so impacted by the wind, then how come those clouds are still there? They're not blown out.
Right.
I know.
Very curious. But
See what I
that's the morning of the 8th. Here's the afternoon of the 8th. And curiously enough, Maui got blocked out.
Oh, yeah. Another coincidence.
Another coincidence.
Yeah, just add that to the list.
Now, these black lines do occasionally happen across the screens, you know,
Exactly.
taking out a part of the screen, but it's just a coincidence that this perfectly hit the fire hit. There's also other records where during the time of the fire, the records were removed. People have shown where they were removed from the satellite records. But here again, you see during the clouds in a perfect straight line coming at us.
I have a
Here's
video.
the followers day on the 9th, and you see that, you know, we're back to normal cloud patterns on the 9th.
Of course. But once again, Lahaina is in the lee of that last shot again. It's got a heavier cloud buildup there. So that's a natural occurring lee spot for that island with that wind direction, it looks like. And so it's kind of funny that they're claiming so much wind push there.
Mm-hmm. So now this is where I save these video loops. They're like, you know, 8 to 10 hours each. I have to save them in real time because they don't last. And then I string them together into one long string to try to get a picture of these weather patterns to see what happens. So this is Hurricane Dora forming off the coast of Mexico, a place where they normally, at 10 degrees latitude, they normally form.
Yep.
You see it picking up wind. And then as it forms a hurricane, it gets really tight. You know, it does a proper funnel. And, you know, I don't see any aerosol anomalies or anything with this. So it looks like a normal hurricane, natural hurricane to me. And you see it coming across the Hawaiian Islands, it stays at 10 degrees latitude, which is what normal hurricanes are supposed to do, because that's where they can sustain their forces. And they don't hit cooler waters to the north. But then you see anomalies start happening to the north. As a hurricane's passing like 500 degrees to the south, you see in this area right up in here where the clouds are broken up, and you see the strange anomaly of these, in this area here, you can start even seeing frequencies kind of like being formed and creating these wave after wave of clouds. And that right there is when the hurricane hits us. When the storm hits us, the hurricane's actually already passed.
Right.
At the moment it happens, and then it goes on its merry way, and then we're suddenly back to normal clouds again.
Yeah.
So repeating this pattern here, this is the area here where I'm seeing, if you look at it, and I'm going to do a little CGI on it to make that stand out even more, but you can see, an anomaly of, I'm going to keep repeating it here. You can see where the frequencies start generating in this area up there. And, almost like a cymatics pattern, where you're putting frequencies on sand and seeing all these patterns happen. And then you see the wave after wave coming up.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I'm not a weather expert, but I do see what you're recognizing, and I can see it with my own eyes on this thing. And it's definitely, I would like to see another couple hurricanes besides this one with that same imagery, and then see if those type of clouds were common in that or in other hurricanes, or if that's just something that was only with this hurricane. Because I don't know what is normal, a baseline. Is that a normal weather pattern to travel along topside of hurricane? I'm not sure.
I've been watching for 15 years and saving all the hurricanes, and I've never seen anything like that before, especially that obvious pattern peeling. I mean, everyone wonders, where did this wind come from? And you can see there's normal clouds north of the hurricane that aren't doing anything weird, but it's, way further to the north.
Yeah, no, I get it. And like I say, you're the weather expert, so I should be asking you the questions on how this works. I know a couple of weather gurus over here that I, used to hang out with quite a bit, and they're all into it like you are. It's not really, I just want to know if it's going to be good to go fishing or not. It's definitely questionable, and there is definitely a line there where you see that happening, where it's just only isolated to that zone right there, which is definitely questionable and something you'd want to look into. But I know what you're talking about the frequencies of sand and water when they're introduced to different frequencies, that they come up with patterns. And it does look like some sort of a print or pattern. It doesn't look completely organic.
And I think that also, in terms of the weather report, the reports that initially came out, they were saying it was Hurricane Dora that was creating those winds. This hurricane, a small hurricane actually, was actually 500 miles away. And normally the winds patterns of a hurricane go about 50 miles from the epicenter of the hurricane itself. And you can see the winds spiraling out, but it really does not reach that 500-mile mark in terms of where the actual fire is.
No, and that's why that video that I have of that one, it shows the wind and the weather pattern of the hurricane that just went up, or Hillary or whatever, that just went up the coast, turned up at Baja instead of coming across Bez. And when you look at those pictures and see their wind speeds, which are much lower than what they're claiming these wind speeds were, but when you see the photos, it's night and day. It's dramatic. Like you're showing me a picture and you go, oh, that's supposed to be 80-mile-an-hour winds. That don't even look like 30-mile-an-hour winds to me, looking at the picture. When you look at these other pictures, it's like 35, 40 miles an hour. And man, it looks like 34 miles an hour. It's you can see it. And I think that they're giving numbers out that don't correlate with the reality of what was really going on.
Well, that's just it. I think that we're giving a lot of stuff that doesn't correlate with reality and saying that this is the cause. One other thing is the temperatures. Certainly there's a mantra going on, especially by our Governor Green, that it's global warming. And when we look at the temperatures since 1936, we see that there's just normal fluctuations. And there are many years that were much warmer than than these years. So again, this mantra of global warming, again, when you look at the facts and data, it doesn't add up.
Yeah, the tail's wagging the dog on this whole global warming thing, and everybody with a brain and critical thinking skills knows that. Also, you're talking about the white powder. You know, it's been pretty established now that they have been doing geoengineering globally and spraying strontium, barium, and aluminum, and a whole bunch of other stuff in that cocktail too. And I'm sure that's not good for us as humans, or good for our trees and plants and fish and all that other stuff. And we all know that aluminum, well, here, put it this way, you can take non-flammable substances sometimes, depending on what they are, and grind them up into a fine enough powder and sprinkle them over a fire, a campfire, and they will flare that campfire up. So it just the surface area of very fine dust. When a fire is attacking a fuel or trying to convert a fuel, it's all about surface area. And the more surface area you have, the more it's going to readily ignite. So if you take a piece of paper and try to catch it on fire, it's going to catch on fire and burn up at a certain time. If you take that paper and you fold it a couple times and you rip it into shreds, and it's still intact as one piece of paper, but it's got rips all in it, it's going to burn way faster because you've increased the surface area of that paper. So with that theory, fine dust of most any kind promotes an ignition. So flour, just cooking flour, take a handful of cooking flour and throw it over a campfire, and you're going to see it's going to flare up because of the surface area, you know. And flour, it may burn, but it's not something we consider flammable. I mean, you know, it'll catch on fire if you let it, but it's not like, you know, these other things. So you take aluminum and strontium and barium, and I'm not as familiar with the strontium and barium. All I know, anything with an in it is not really good for us. And you sprinkle that on the fire, and you're going to see probably increased temperatures, and ignition is going to, easeability is going to go way, way up.
Well, we did notice that white haze before the thing, and I've seen hazes before. I've never seen that white type of haze. And I can imagine that if, you know, how do you create steam, you know, or for a concert or something, use ultrasound on water and it creates a vapor and stuff. So I can imagine if some sort of frequency is being played out there, then you can create that funny white haze that looked like, you know, something at a concert, you know?
Yeah, it could have been that, like a fog machine type thing, you know, where it's creating that, pulling the moisture out of things. And maybe they did that prior to the fire so that the humidity, you know, the moisture content of the materials ignited more readily. I mean, that would be an angle to check into, because it's all about moisture, right? You put water on a fire, that's how you put it out. Water is 100% moisture, right? It's just moisture. It's got oxygen in it, which is basically an oxidizer, but it doesn't get used because of its state, right? But when you turn it into steam, it expands 2,100 times. I think it's 2,100 times its size. So a molecule of water expands when it turns into steam readily. And we actually have a lot of trees in the islands that hold a lot of water, and when they're subjected to massive heat, they literally explode. And it's not because they're on fire, it's because the water is vaporizing and fast inside them so fast it expands and blows it up.
So here's a plausible, you know, reason. Obviously I can't prove anything, but do we have the technology to create frequencies, you know, in the cloud layers? Yes, we do. Here's one of those technologies.
Yep.
This sometimes sits in the Honolulu Harbor at Pearl Harbor. It's a HARP installation.
Yep.
They call it the HARP Dome. It used to be a big HARP installation up in Alaska, a big array, but that became obsolete. And what is HARP? It's an ionospheric heater. It shoots radio waves, high power radio waves. And you can see there's a lot of high power capacitor chambers and stuff on this boat. There's a high power, you know, capability to generate energy on this boat.
Right.
You heat up the ionosphere, which is highest part in the stratosphere. That's where the ozone layer is. And it heats it up and makes it actually raise up higher. So it's an ionospheric heater. It's Tesla technology. Tesla did that back in the early part of the century. And then you suddenly turn it off and you create a frequency down below. You can actually create a vibration. Well, Tesla knew that 5 hertz is the frequency of an earthquake. He actually made an earthquake happen in upstate New York with its ionospheric heater that's been well documented, where normally earthquakes don't happen. by heating it up and then dropping it and creating a vibration. So do we have the technology to create frequencies, to create wave after wave of wind pattern? Yes, we do. We do have the technology. Was it used in this case? I don't know. But here it is coming in. You can see it in Seattle right there where it's coming into port, Seattle,
Right.
with the dome. So it stays out in the Pacific. They call it Pacific Theater. And it is quite capable of doing weather manipulation.
Yeah, as far as all those technology goes, I read up on them. I'm probably not as scientifically read up on them as you are, but I'm familiar with this thing, and they've got many others that do. They've got stationary arrays. I believe there's one in Oroville, California. Once again, you're going to get another guy that's very similar to you that broadcast stuff. Is called One Pacific Redwood. Check out his site, and he'll show you when there's a hurricane developing or a rainstorm developing. It develops in a circular pattern, and as it gets more organized, it spins tighter and tighter, and that's how it builds its strength. And they can shoot these microwave beams or whatever they are, radio waves, into these things and create a right angle in that storm, and it breaks up the storm. And he shows it literally, like you're showing me those pictures with the wind and all the stuff. He's got those pictures. He shows. He goes, "Oh, here was California has all those fires. They were going to get a bunch of rain because fires create rain too. They put particulate in the sky, right? And they heat up everything, and so they suck up more moisture, and then that moisture wants to come back down. So fires actually create weather." And this guy shows you, oh, here was some weather, coming in to help with the fires in California, and they shot it with this whatever beam you're calling it, microwave thing, and then it breaks up the thing, and they get no water, so they could break up the storms. And he guy shows it like, oh, here it's happening, just like you are, and it's pretty cool to watch. And as far as them having the technology, I have no doubt that they have it. So I think you're right on track with all that stuff. That's what it looks like right there. And Oroville has one of these.
Yeah. This is the array in Alaska, and it's called HAARP, High Energy Active Oral Research Program. And it is an ionospheric heater. And it is capable of heating up the ionosphere and creating a low pressure cell underneath it. And through that, you can guide storms and things by creating low pressure cells and deciding if you have multiple of these arrays around the world, which we do, then you can have multiple arrays pointing to the same spot and have even more effect. So was this being used? Was this an engineered windstorm, or was this a natural windstorm? And this is something that, was quintessential to the whole thing, was the wind. I mean, you can have a wind and some arsonists going around starting fires and burn down a town.
Yep.
You don't have to have directed energy weapons or other things. Yep. You can just have arson.
Yeah, you're right.
And I did find some arson points for the fires just outside of Laniopoko. There's on the Lahaina side, there's 2 different places on either side of the road where you can see where the fire started and made its pathway down toward Lahaina. About 30 feet off the road, further than you can flick a cigarette. You have to get out of your car, go. You can see where the weeds were lit right alongside the road. You see a long tail going for a long period of time, then it expands, gets bigger and bigger. That's on the side of the highway. So that shows me that those brush fires were not started, by lightning or a telephone pole. There's nothing around it. They were arson points.
Yeah, and I have been to a lightning strike fire in Hawaii once in my career, that I know of. It was confirmed. Other than that, lightning strikes in Hawaii are generally pretty rare. That's not something that happens to us in Hawaii as much as other places in the world because of our humidity. But not saying it couldn't happen, but it is a more irregular occurrence.
Well, I grew up in Missouri, and I did see trees that were hit by lightning. And it's interesting because lightning is plasma energy.
Yep.
The fourth state of energy. So plasma is created within lightning. And the trees burnt from the inside out with lightning striking, particularly at the base of the tree. When the lightning hits it, when it hits the ground, then that's where it disperses in the most heat from. So the root of the tree is actually starting to burn, when lightning hits, and you get an internal thing.
Correct.
And with these points, we're seeing not only here, but other fires around the world. I mean, we're not the only one. The big people know about is Paradise, California.
Ilona, Paradise, all those.
And you see all these pictures of trees burnt from the inside out. We're seeing the same thing here. Then we can't rule anything out. I mean, was it a combination of natural or engineered wind? Arson points for sure. Were there other sorts of things involved? I don't know.
And that plasma, the lightning, when it hits the tree, it's using the moisture in the tree as its conductivity to reach ground, right? It's trying to ground out, right? So it's the moisture into that tree. So the more moisture in the tree, the more of a lightning rod it is, so to speak. And the more, like I said, when that lightning hits the tree, it also turns that water into steam instantaneously. It expands 2,100 times its size molecularly, and a lot of times it'll blow the trees. It'll actually blow up, kind of. That's why you'll see a big, huge tree and it got hit by lightning, and like maybe halfway down the tree is gone. It's just blown up and gone, right? And then it finally reaches the ground, and then it does what you say. As it hits the ground, there's that kind of release of energy at that point too. And we see that every once in a while, but it's a lot more rare in Hawaii. The fact that one tree picture you have where that limb is sawed off, and you can see the bark is completely unscathed, and then the inside's charred, not just burnt. That's real good to me. I'm not a scientist, but that's crazy. I mean, that's not normal physics, right?
Here's another one. Everyone knows this famous building on, Front Street,
Yep.
Lahaina. But someone took a reel of driving by as the fire was burning, and you see the base of the tree right here. It's got green grass all the way around it. It's got sidewalk in front of it. And you see the base of the tree right here is on fire. Is that something normal that you've ever seen before?
The only way that I would see that would happen is if there was some collected ironwood needles in a little crack there and around all that burl, and a cinder just happened to hit that exact spot and caught those little pine needles, dried pine needles, and that all the pine needles on that tree look to be very green. But a lot of time, that's the only way I could see that just on the bark of that tree that a cinder is going to just catch it on fire like that. That's kind of weird,
Yeah.
But like I say, I'm looking at a picture from far away, and I'm not right there, but it is kind of irregular that it didn't fuse over from the fire on the house or anywhere else. That was the origin of that fire of the tree, is at that point right there. So how did that get ignited? Very interesting, An ironwood tree is not something that you just go walk up with a lighter and you catch it on fire. They're kind of, it's a pretty dense wood. It's not what you would use for kindling. It's what you would use to sustain long-term burning.
Yeah. Well, that tree did, burn all the way down, and the tree to the right, which was unaffected, was still pretty much intact after the burn. Right.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I say, there's a lot of anomalies, those little case by case things. You have to sit there and say, how could this happen? And then reason out probability, go through the thing, say, wow, it's like a 90% probability that this didn't happen naturally, whatever, and you're going to have to just take case by case on that, because nothing can be lumped together. Each little thing is its own incident. Every tree that burned, every car that burned, every house that didn't burn, those are all things that you're collectively taking in. And then, but like you said earlier, there's an extreme amount of anomalies that demand real answers, not just, and I do believe that the wind speeds that they're posting for that fire, you know more about the weather than I do, but I don't think the wind speeds were nearly what they were saying they were. I think they were much more reduced than what they're claiming. And if you look at the pictures, and they said there was no helicopters flying in, and I've seen pictures from people's phones of helicopters, big birds, big Ericssons or big, Sikorskis, like big sky crane type birds, flying around there. And I've seen the pictures. Now can't vet that well from where I am, because, I have no way of doing that. But there are pictures out there that there were large aircraft flying around during the fire, and whether we can validate those or not, I don't know. But if there was aircraft flying, my question is, so there's a mast unit on Oahu, right? It's a military support helicopter. And I used to work on that crew. On my days off from the fire department, I'd fly to Oahu and Big Island, and I'd work at the PTA and over there. And it's a portion of the military that interfaces with the public when the public resources aren't available or overrun. And so some of the smaller little birds, like the Hughes 500s that these guys fly around, you know, and they call them Bambi buckets full of water, and they use helicopters to put out fires a lot. I don't know if I'm sure you're familiar with that. You see them flying around with the big thing underneath and they drop water. Well, they have a much lower wind threshold for those helicopters. The VNE that those helicopters can perform, especially exterior loads like that, heavy exterior loads, are quite limited. But these big military birds are quite capable of much more extreme conditions and being able to operate in. And that was one of my other questions is, you know, why didn't ask for military support with the larger aircraft to come in and do water drops of some sort? Because they were obviously flying in those conditions, because I've seen pictures of them. So why weren't these more capable, larger resources? Usually they have them pre-set up, you know, with memorandums, MOAs, in case this happens, we can call you for additional support. There you go. There's a big bird. That's actually a Chinook. So that can do quite a bit. The ones that I saw pictures of were more like sky cranes, where they're not so much for people and stuff inside of them. They're more like a skeleton, but they can pick up containers and whatnot and pick them up and move them into different areas. But that would be a good example of what I'm talking about. And that's a large water drop. That's a much bigger bucket, Bambi bucket, than you'd be able to use on like the fire department helicopters, right? They could probably use 250 gallons. And in those wind speeds, maybe only 100 gallons. I don't even know if they were operable in those wind speeds, but I still question the wind speeds, that they weren't valid. I think the wind speeds were much less than they're claiming. So.
This picture was taken 2 weeks after the fire, and they were still putting out hotspots using this technology.
Yeah, and that's our, okay, this is too big for us, and we use this on a daily basis in brush fires. Even on Kauai, we just don't have that asset as far as that heavy lift bird to be able to haul around that big of a Bambi bucket. That's quite a large, that's huge. That's like dropping a swimming pool on somebody. That bucket is a lot of water, not quite a swimming pool, more like a jacuzzi, but it's a lot of water. And when the impact hits the ground, it hits the ground and it blows out laterally, and it's like a water bomb. It puts out quite a bit of fire. It's amazing what it can do. It can also do some damage too, because it's water, 8 pounds a gallon. But I was very surprised they weren't using these larger assets that could handle those weather conditions and try to use those to help mitigate the situation. That was one of my questions as well. It was like, why was there not these assets deployed? You know, I don't know. There's just too many things. There's like at least 20 points that you could go down, bullet points with questions that just seem to need to be answered.
Well, actually, Tim, we actually have about over 50 right now that we're looking at, and you just added a few more actually. So thank you in terms of the investigation.
Yeah. So, I mean, this thing, it's, you know, when we look, it's so multifaceted, right? There's before, during, and after. So you got different time frames as this thing developed. I find it very strange that a little brush fire on the side of the road with high enough winds, they jump the road. I've seen it happen a lot of times. So that, you know, that is plausible, but that a fire that, you know, originally where that fire was supposedly started looked like it was up away from that bypass road quite a ways, like up more of Mauka. And then all of a sudden the fire's down on the side of the road. And I'm like, well, how did it get from there to there without nobody noticing it? That's a kind of a long distance, right? For no one to go, hey, fire department, you know, the fire's back, you know, and it's coming towards the road. I mean, it seemed like quite a geographical distance between where they're saying it started, the incipient point, and where it finally hit the town. And I know fire can burn fast, and especially if it's wind driven, but that seemed like weird that it got from up there to down there. And it doesn't seem like there was a fuse or a connecting point. And, you know, it just, there's another bullet point, you know, so.
Yeah, sure. Bruce, do you have any more questions of Tim at this time?
Well, I do have this video that I took here of what I'm calling a probable ignition point alongside the highway, and then I found one opposite side of the street later. This is just on the Laniapoko side, and you can see right up here in this tall brush, about 30-40 feet off the highway, further than you can flick a cigarette.
Right.
You can see that point right there, And the winds normally blow this way, like 99% of the time, winds blow toward Lahaina from Laniopoko, you see up above. And you see that point there going along this ridge line and expanding, and I have a little 30-second video.
That's your coning we were talking about. So it starts at a narrow point and then it cones outwardly looking for fuel. And that one's showing very slow wind driven, like that's very wide. It's getting wide quickly. So that would be something that didn't have a lot of wind pushing it at that point.
It burns up the hill and then continues down and goes toward Lahaina.
Got it.
Now that's where people think it jumped the highway, but I actually have a separate video where I later discovered the ignition point on the other side of the highway too.
Okay, so if that fire you were just showing, and then you're going down that you're sitting with the road, you got the picture of the road, and it looks like it goes under a culvert or a bridge, and it crosses on like a gully or like a little arroyo, and then so how you would tell is if that fire crossed the road right where they're saying there, and then you took an aerial footage and put a pinpoint on that spot. If there was fire upwind from that spot, that would be irregular. See what I mean? So the fire would be blown downwind, and all that massive heating and stuff would be blown from that point downwind. And that cone, when it jumped across the road, should go through that neighborhood like a cone. And it should be from that point getting wider and wider away from you. But it shouldn't really, I mean, I shouldn't say it shouldn't. If it's really super wind driven, it's hard for that heat, excuse me, to go against the 80-mile-an-hour supposedly winds and burn back up against the wind, and especially if the slope, well, it's a very gradual slope. It's pretty flat right there. But it's just kind of weird that the fire from that point looks like there was burned to the left up further wind upstream, so to speak, from that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like the fire's burning against the wind, which it can do, but it's not the way it wants to go. So if there's, I don't know in relationship where that point is in town, if that's the middle of town or the—
No, that's Laniopoko. That's just outside of Laniopoko. So it's still quite a ways away from town, but you can see where the fire went toward town and started taking out the south side of the town from that fire. While the other one from Lahaina Luna came down the mountain that way into town. So what I see is a 2-point burn going on.
Correct. Yeah. So you got two different spots. They're claiming that fire, that it hit the town from two different spots. And it looks like there's quite a distance between those spots. And it looked like there was quite a distance between the original point where the pump shed or whatever that was, that supposedly the power line fell down and caught the grass on fire, where the whole thing started earlier in the day. Those points seem to be like you're looking at a big time difference and a big geographic difference in those areas. And I mean, you're talking about daylight hours, people driving down the street like normal. On Kauai, I can tell you from my experience, we get fires in a place called Anahola, plenty, like all the time. And you're driving down the road, you look over, you see smoke, and you call 911. You say, hey, just reporting smoke at this point on right outside of Anahola, mile marker 13 or whatever it is. And you go, there's a brush fire, and they go, oh, we have that reported already, or oh, thank you, we don't have reports of that. And then they'll send someone out to see if it's a controlled burn or what. And that's the fire department goes out and checks to see what's going on, right? There's a fire. So for that to burn that distance and that long, and no one reporting it, like it almost like they didn't, like it just happened, like it snuck up on them, and it just doesn't make sense. I mean, I can travel quickly and then all that, but how many people don't have a cell phone now, right? You're driving along in your car and you see it, they just grab their phone and they go, hey, there's a fire, right? And then you get 50 of those calls. When you get one, you get 50, and that's another thing that would be good to see those audio logs to see if the calls were coming in and if they were being if they were responded upon, right? You're going to see when the initial, hey, this guy called in, Steve Smith was driving down the road and they saw the fire and they reported it. Well, did anything happen? Did they send the units out? Those are another question you're going to get with those audio logs if you can get a hold of those.
Great.
Anyways, I don't really have much else. I hope I helped you out in some way, and you can call me at any time. I'll try to send you that video of that one that's really interesting. I think, Bruce, you're going to like it. I don't think it exceeds anything you're doing. It just gives you a really good visual comparison of what you're talking about and what they're saying. And I think it'll be good for you just to look at, if nothing else. I don't, know if you'll include it in anything, but at least you'll look at it and go, wow, you'll see what I'm talking about with the wind, the pictures of the wind. It's not even, it's crazy. It's night and day.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, this has been extremely valuable for us. Certainly, I think to all the people also looking at our videos and the information that we're collecting, you certainly put things in perspective for us in a way that we can really start to further our investigation even more, and even more questions now also that were raised from your discussion. So greatly appreciative of your expertise that you're sharing with us all here. And we're going to keep on digging. And yes, we'll keep on asking questions, Tim, as we move forward, because I think as we dig more and more, and especially as we do the interviews of people who were in the fire itself, more strange things are starting to surface. So again, we'll be in touch with you as we move forward with all of this.
Okay. I think Bruce is real key, valuable asset in what he's doing with the weather, because from an outside perspective, it seems like everything they're saying is based on the weather, right? That was how this happened, because of this crazy weather. And we live in Hawaii, and hurricanes are normal, and that one wasn't even that close of a hit, and it wasn't even that big. And, I almost feel like it was pre-planned, like, here it comes, here's our chance. And then whatever they did, or I hate to use the word they, because, they is somebody, they have a face and a name, but those weather patterns and that weather showing that's their beginning and end of everything that happened in Lahaina was based on this weather phenomenon. And I think as you dive into the weather and try to explain what could have or couldn't have happened using the weather as the basis, because that's what they're using as their basis for how it was allowed to happen. So I think if that's debunked as a primary target, that's going to really make it easier to debunk some of the other stuff. That's just my opinion. I think the weather's a key component in this whole thing as far as their reasoning of their response and how it happened. And I argue the point that more could have been done. The weather wasn't as bad as they said. And it doesn't explain all these little questions. So
great. Thank you. Bruce, do you have any other things you'd like to add?
We do have this, where we looked at the weather to kind of, the temperatures, to try to, talk about, wizard global warming. And so I'm going to pull that screenshot up here.
We actually got this data when they were looking at releasing 40 billion mosquitoes here in just in Maui. And they said that the reason why they have to release these mosquitoes was because of the infection of malaria of birds, and it was due to global warming.
So here's a chart by decade of the temperature from 1960s, 70s, 90s, right till now. And this last column here is, the mean temperature. And you can see where we're 74, 77, 75, 79.
Those are the lows, Bruce. I think it's the middle column. Just you can go up. Middle column is the averages that we're looking at.
Right, they're the average. So you see the average is not, it's a degree warmer, a degree less, goes up and down a little bit. But certainly, by the decade, when you average everything out, that's the most important of all these things. It doesn't add up to everything. Yeah, the average, minimum, maximum, and the middle is the average. You're correct.
Yeah, we all know, and as humans, they like to go back and say what happened in the past. Geologists and all these guys like to tell you how old something is with carbon dating and all this stuff. And we believe all that because we were taught that that's science and that's what it is. But this planet's been around so much longer than man ever has, and it's always in a state of flux. It's either getting hotter or colder at any given time, at any given place. Weather patterns change. And I don't believe that you can look at, even since man's been on the planet, as a complete analysis of the history of the planet. You know what I mean? It's who are we to say? Maybe it's supposed to be frozen solid. Maybe it's supposed to be hotter than hell. I don't know. Maybe it's supposed to be like the Philippines and Hawaii. Who are we to say? We don't go back far enough in the history of the planet to really, they like to prove their science and say that they know, but the more we know, the more we find out we really don't know, And that's the way I look at it. I really don't think someone can come up and tell you that there's global warming, at least not at this point. You're talking about a couple degrees at best. It's not even that. And it shows, if you look at it, it goes up and down all the time. We have a whole, and we have El Niños and La Niñas and all these different things, right, that affect it. And I mean, all kinds of stuff, so I think the stuff you're doing with this direct analysis of the actual weather within a few days prior to the event and during and after the event, I think that's going to be a key component in kind of taking the legs out of their claims on the weather and how that's why it happened. It wasn't our fault. It was the weather's fault, which I don't buy at all.
Yeah, and the weather is the key to the whole thing. So
if the weather was the problem, they could have turned the power off, and then that would have not let that happen, right? I mean, nobody wants to be without power very long, but I mean, there's options, right? I mean, if it's that bad, where it's going to cause something like this, but I know hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah,
true. Well, again, Tim, thank you so much for taking this time to share your expertise with us. Again, it's very important to us here as we really start to dig and really look at what truly happened. So many of us have so many questions, especially those who were directly affected by the fire. They're just asking, like, how could this level of destruction could possibly happen? And again, part of this is to make it so that we prevent this from happening again in other areas, but yet we're seeing a lot of other similar fires in other parts of the world at this point in time. So again, I think this investigation has a lot of implications that we have to get out.
Also, see if I don't know if you were able to obtain or you're requesting it, but the response manual for that district or that area, that's going to be huge too, because that's going to show if they were negligent in their own plan, because they have a fire plan, they have a flood plan, they have a tsunami plan, they have a high wind plan, they have an airplane crash plan, they have a toxic chemical release plan, they've got a dam breaking plan, they've got a plan for everything. So there's plans out there, and you can see if they had the right response for their plan. If they didn't, they have to justify why they didn't follow their own plan.
Excellent point. And we did request that, Tim, and hopefully we'll get that manual fairly soon.
Okay.
All right.
Again, I'll talk to you guys soon, I'm sure. And you guys be safe, doing what you're doing is putting a target on your back, right? So be careful.
We will be careful. Thank you, Tim. And thank you again for all this great information that you just gave us.
Just so you know, if I commit suicide, I didn't commit suicide. It was Hillary.
Got it. And I think that's true for all of us here too. So
I'm a happy guy. I don't suicide.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Tim.